screen now. Can you guys see my screen? So I'll just jump in here with two images, one on the left and the other on the right. The one on the left is from 2013. It's a New York Times piece that was written about GiveDirectly and our work with the headline, "Is it nuts to give to the poor with no strings attached?" Basically, 8 years ago, we were asked, are we crazy? And then on the right is a page taken from the from the White House's homepage, talking about cash payments directly to families in need 8 years on, basically this year, saying that families making under $110,000 a year will receive an average of about $5,600. And all told, the U.S. during the pandemic is spending about $800 billion in terms of direct cash relief to families in need. So how do we go from the left to the right, from being considered nuts to being the default response tool? And what role has evaluation played in growing this global cash movement? And again, hopefully I'll touch on some of the practices for evaluation that GiveDirectly has done, how this has contributed to the global landscape and movement for cash, and also touch on how we're applying some theory behind both formative and summative evaluation techniques. So before diving in, let me just give some quick context about the organization. We're a nonprofit that does just one thing. We deliver cash to families living in poverty unconditionally with no strings attached. We just celebrated paying our millionth person to date. Super excited about that, and have raised more than $750 million to date. We're an incredibly research and evaluation driven organization with more than 15 randomized controlled trials, the gold standard for empirical evidence completed or ongoing to date. And we deliver cash for two reasons. One is that we believe that people deserve the choice on how best to improve their lives, and cash enables their choice. Cash gives you the flexibility to figure out if, hey, today I should spend money on food for my family, or I should spend money on childcare because I need to go back to work, or I should spend money on a health aid for my parent because they need that care. So that flexibility is inherently, I think, very empathetic to the fact that all of us have different needs and different choices, and oftentimes knows best. We know best on how best to improve our lives, especially compared to potentially a technocrat that might be sitting in DC, New York, or Geneva, which are often the centers for aid decisions around the world. So that's the first reason we believe in giving people the choice to improve their lives. And the second is that there's just a lot of evidence and evaluation that giving cash directly to people in need is just a good thing. What do I mean by a lot of evidence, and what do I mean by good things? So there have been more than 165 high quality studies, many of them randomized controlled trials. Again, randomized controlled trials here are experiments whereby you pick a population that will receive the intervention and pick a population that will not receive the intervention. And you randomize which populations receive an intervention and which populations don't. And then you measure the impact of the delivery of the intervention after a particular period of time. This is incredibly prevalent in medical industries. This is how our vaccines, medications all get tested. And in social science, it's becoming more and more prevalent. Several years ago, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo won the Nobel Prize precisely for the popularization of this approach not just in the sciences, taking that from the sciences to economics and the social sciences. And so that's a lot of the, that's what I mean here by high quality, just incredibly rigorous, very, very high quality evaluations. What do I mean by good outcomes? We see everything from increases in food expenditure, increases in childhood nutrition, increases adoption in school attendance and education, just raw increases in wealth. People are just wealthier after receiving our transfers. And we also see decreases in negative outcomes. So less child labor, less intimate partner violence. And then also what dogged the cash movement for decades was the fear that if you just give people money with no strings attached, they'll blow it. That they would spend it on temptation goods, alcohol, tobacco, prostitution. And it just turns out, study after study and meta studies on this just shows that people can be trusted. Sure, we all make mistakes. Once in a while, I'll make a bad financial decision. And, yes, I do enjoy a good stiff drink after a long day of work. But by and large, giving cash unconditionally does not lead to an increase in expenditure on vice goods. So I won't spend too long on this slide. I'll just say that, what we really do is we do the whole process. We design a cash transfer program. We identify the people in need. We enroll them. We pay. And then finally, we work with external research institutions to evaluate this work. Now, I'll talk about, now that I've given a bit of context about the organization and what we do, let's talk specifically about evaluation. And I'm going to touch on a couple of different types of evaluation today and how it leads into this circle of starting with pre-project evaluation, trying to understand if your designs and your hypotheses for what you're trying to do make sense. Mid-project little tests, formative evals, trying to get a sense and a read of the room, a read of your population that you're trying to serve, trying to figure out if everything is running and operating according to plan. At the end of the project, the summative evaluations, looking at whether the intended outcomes, if you're trying to lift people out of poverty, you're trying to make them less hungry, if you're trying to reduce mobility during a pandemic by giving people cash transfers, do those end results actually get achieved? And then finally, how does this all feed in to, if we think about nonprofit practice and management, how does it lead to the results lead to organizational level change management within your company, right? Because at the end of the day, why do we do research? Why do we do evaluations? Yes, we do it to make donors happy. Yes, we do it so that we can sleep well at night, but we also do it to learn. And when evaluations will give both good, normatively good or bad outcomes, and we should learn from all of it, keep the best practices, and wean out the things that are not giving us the desired outcome. So then ultimately, how do you achieve organizational change with the results of your evaluation? So let me just jump in here on the first point, pre-project evaluation. So let me just give you an example here of something that we're actually doing right now live. What we're trying to design is an interface where people in a particular geography that may be experiencing lockdowns, or let's say a crisis in Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo recently, there was a giant volcano that erupted and they had to evacuate the whole town. And we were trying to design a program whereby if you dialed 999, you could apply for cash aid and have cash land in your phone. that you can then use to, get send your kids to the neighboring village, evacuate your home, etc. So what we're trying to design here is an enrollment interface that people can, dial 999. Instead of getting an ambulance when you dial 911, you get cash in your phone, right? And the evaluation questions that we had to ask were, well, are we designing for a smartphone or are we designing for a feature phone? Right, the old school kind of Nokias. And then when we're designing that, what language do Congolese in this region, in Kinshasa here, in this particular case, speak? Do they speak Lingala or do they speak French? Then there's a separate question here. Do they write in Lingala? Do they write and read in Lingala or French, which might be very different from reading? And then finally, do they like to talk or do they like to type, right? What is the user behavior here? Because if we're designing a program where they dial 999 for aid, and they have to key in, they have to provide some information, are they providing the information via voice or via typing? What will get the highest adoption? So these are a bunch of evaluation questions we have to figure out. We have a bunch of hypotheses, but instead of just designing straight out, we need to test these things. And so we have field teams that go out and do focus groups and interviews, talk to groups of people of different demographics. Surveys are really helpful when trying to get a quantitative read. And then of course, observation, right? So we prototype a few interfaces, put it in the hands of potential users, and then just watch how they interact with that. So these are some pre-program launch kind of evaluation that we do. So let's just say we've launched our project. It's super, super important to understand how we operationalize and how we're performing while operations are live. So let me just give you a quote here from a call center that we run of a beneficiary. So let's say we've designed a program, people apply for aid, it works, and then we have a call center that makes both outbound calls to assess the performance of our program, but then also has a hotline, inbound calls, to hear complaints and to sense check on the ground if stuff is working. And so this is a quote from one of our beneficiaries. It says, a call center agent, Anna, recorded this. It says, Miss Rebecca of X Village reported that after she received her first transfer, she received a very serious conflict with her landlord, where he asked her to give him 10,000 Liberian dollars for every cash out. And he forced her out of the house when she refused. Now, this is bad, right? It's an unintended consequence, adverse outcome for our recipient. At the end of the day, when we do our final summative evaluation and we are testing for increase in income, sure, Ms. Rebecca may score on the increased income. She may have made more money, but she may be doing worse in housing. She may have been forced out of her house. She could have been subject to extortion. Or what if the extortion, the fact that she has more cash has put her in even more vulnerability, and then and that actually leads to her failing on the summative evaluation as well. She ultimately is not able to make more money, doesn't actually get more income because her living situation is just now unstable. So as a manager, when you read this data point, you start to get alarmed. You start to go, whoa, how bad is this adverse outcome? Have we caused systematic vulnerability between landlords and renters? And you want to be able to try and understand, is this an isolated case? Is this a case that can be mediated with case management, with a field officer going out to help mediate the situation? Or is there something fundamentally systemic in our design? So here's now us taking these issues and aggregating it up into aggregated monitoring across our follow-up and hotline systems, right? So a systematic issue, and this was a snapshot point in time from a particular region in Liberia, where we had 1.69%, the top right here, of people reporting that they had trouble collecting their cash. So the way we send transfers is we use mobile money, which is basically a text message lands in your phone, and you can show that text message to an agent, and the agent can release physical hard cash to you. And there are agents all around the country, even in very poor remote villages. And so what we have here is then, we want to say, okay, let's drill down into what's behind this 1.7%. Let's understand which villages here are really driving this issue with collection. Is there a particular liquidity issue in a particular geography that we can mitigate? Again, if people can't cash out, it's going to fail the final summative evaluation, right? So, and during the process, you want to be able to be collecting a lot of this live feedback so that you can make adjustments. And so from here, a manager is able to drill in and go and look and say, hey, look, on our last village on the list here, Dongfeng Su, right? That's driving a majority of the cash out issues. What's going on? Let's send a field officer in to investigate. Is there a liquidity issue here? So I've talked about the first two types of evals we do. Now I'm gonna touch on the final evaluation here. And this is the one where we say, okay, in your theory of change, we can talk about outputs, where we measure outputs, how many people have been paid, how many transfers have been successful. Now let's talk about outcomes and impacts, right? Are we actually making people richer? Richer as defined by an increase in assets, an increase in consumption, income. Are we making people less hungry? People more food secure? Are people's mental health better? So these very, very large questions, we oftentimes outsource to a number of different companies and organizations such as IPA, ID Insight, JPAL. These are just incredible research organizations focused on very, very high standards of rigor, and often partner with academic institutions and professors who publish papers in journals on these results. Now, on this previous slide, right? So some of these results we show, between the control group and the treatment group. Let's say, let's look at the income line here in this image. We saw a 33% increase in incomes in livestock and non-agricultural business after our cash transfers were injected. And so all these are great numbers, right? You see, okay, people are wealthier, they're healthier, they're happier, mental health, cortisol levels fell. But then really the next question when we're thinking about evaluation, really, and now take that back, right, and think from a policymaker's perspective. If you were the government and you had seen these results from GiveDirectly, a natural next question should then be, okay, these are great, these are good results. How then do they compare to my next best alternative, to my next intervention? So yeah, so beyond evaluating if our specific program works, how does it compare to alternative programs? And so what was really exciting, and a table I'm about to show here is the results of an experiment that was done, that was funded by USAID and Google, that compared the effects of just giving cash to individuals sorry, not to individuals, to families with malnourished children, versus giving an alternative intervention, such as a full suite of programs. They were giving savings training, high yield seeds, sanitation and wash, and nutritious eating coaching, etc. And so there was just giving people cash, and there was giving them a bundle of interventions targeted at improving nutrition. And so what happened here? This again was a randomized controlled trial. There are 3 treatment arms here. Gikariro is the name of that bundle. It was just a local name in Rwanda for that bundle of services that I had described. And the middle column here is a small cash transfer, about $142, so sized the same amount as Gikariro. It's the bundle of services. And then on the right column here, we see a large cash transfer, about $532. So those are what those 3 columns mean. And then on the left, we have nutritional outcomes, which are called the primary outcomes here in the bottom. Secondary outcomes, the economic improvements that we were trying to achieve. And you see here that basically Gikariro had no impacts on any of the outcomes except for savings. So the savings program worked pretty well. People saved more. A similarly sized cash transfer program also had no impacts on nutrition, right? So Gikariro costs $142 per household to implement. Our cash transfer costs about $142 per household to implement. Also had no impact on health, but had significant, very, very significant impacts on a number of other economic dimensions. And then our large transfer size hit almost every single indicator, improving not just a suite, improving every health metric except anemia. It even reduced child mortality. I think 1 percentage point, don't quote me on this, translated to something like 12 children or something like that. So what's super interesting here is 2 things. One is that cash, a intervention not designed specifically for health, because you could spend it on any number of things, had incredible health outcomes. At least on the larger transfer size. The second takeaway here from a policymaker's perspective is that if you're trying to achieve health outcomes, neither Gikariro at $142 nor a small transfer size makes any sense. You have to spend more. You have to spend at least $500 in cash transfers. And so from a policymaker's perspective, evaluation is just wildly helpful, right? Because you know, okay, based on a number of outcomes with a particular demographic, what could I expect? And so maybe I should just start spending less on the first 2 columns and start spending more on the third intervention design here. Now, let me touch on the final piece here, which is on for the final kind of piece for this section here on organizational level change management, right? Okay, so we've done all these different levels of evaluation. We started the pre-project work. It informed our design for our project. We had a midpoint evaluation, and then we had a final endpoint evaluation. How does this affect how our organization does business? This is a change management process I've been working through with the company. We use this for new research results or innovations that we have demonstrated. Right, every result should cause us to move in 2 directions. We should capture the positives, the upside value, and then we should downside risk protect. We should align on what the value of this research has shown. The 2 points I talked about in the previous slide. we should de-risk some of the things if we have found out that liquidity was an issue, or Miss Rebecca in that particular case, if she was if tensions between landlords and tenants were an issue, we should design mitigants to correct for these things. We should create comms and press materials. And then once we are ready, we should start designing long-term structural changes that result from these learnings. Maybe we run more community sensitization programs ahead of each transfer, sensitizing landlords and tenants about the incoming cash transfer, how to deal with bullying and extortion. These are new structural risk mitigation methods that we try and put together. This is in the green number 4 tile. And if we have learned that that large cash transfers are really good at affecting nutritional outcomes with malnourished children, let's capture that best practice, right? And let's work that into our future program designs. And so we try and go through these processes when we have developed an innovation, a new research result. Now, I'm going to circle back to the first question that I asked, at the start, which is, okay, sure, great. We've done internal evaluations, we've changed our organization. How do you move from program organizational change to sector change? How does an entire industry move towards cash? And what was really exciting from the Rwanda nutrition study that I showed was that we got a bunch of press with literally the headline from the New York Times, "Is cash better for poor people than conventional foreign aid?" And a headline from Vox, saying the small study in Rwanda that could change the way the US does foreign aid. How do you move from program and using evaluation to drive program and organizational change to driving sector change? So now, at the start of this presentation, I said, cash got really big, right? They started calling us nuts in 2013, 2021. It's become the default approach to the economic response to COVID. Just how big did cash get in the sector? Just how much did the sector move? At the individual NGO level, we literally saw a 6x increase in revenue from 2019 to 2020. In the humanitarian sector, cash and voucher transfers in the last 5 years have gone from 5% to 20% of total humanitarian spending. Compared to our last great crisis, social protection spending around the world, this is not just cash, but cash insurance vouchers has gone up almost 5x. It's wild. And the federal government, the US federal government, through CARES and the American Recovery Act, is spending $860 billion in direct cash payments to households. And it's huge monumental shifts. This is just a chart showing our kind of annual spending. You see the second dotted line, just this giant jump since COVID happened. And this is the global outlook. Yellow is basically where cash transfers fall under. It falls under social assistance. Cash transfers are one portion of the yellow buckets. You can see the breakout on the table below. It is by far the largest largest intervention, 734 measures to deliver cash transfers around the world. So huge, right? I'm not sure if the the new high-tech system in the room allows people to shout out answers to this, but Bill, do you think it works if we give it a try?
The room does allow for a robust Q&A, so we can proceed. So go ahead.
Super. Any ideas on why we think, any ideas on why we think cash became the go-to economic response tool? If anybody in the class wants to shout out.
Yes, ma'am.
It's easy to
Andrew Yang.
I was gonna say it's easy to transfer while social distancing. You don't have to have people on the ground really interacting and potentially spreading the virus.
Exactly. Great. Ease of use, ease of distribution. That's one thing. What's next? Anybody else?
No one person was going through the exact same thing in terms of whether they lost their job or housing or any of that other stuff.
Exactly. Amazing. The need and the justification was so clear. That's exactly right. Anyone else here?
Yes.
Maybe because unlike other natural disasters, there was no infrastructure destruction. Rather, it was more about putting money in people's pockets to fulfill their basic needs until this pandemic passed.
Super. Yes, justification also makes a lot of sense during this particular kind of consumption-driven crisis. Nobody wants to give our other Brown alum, Andrew Yang, any love for driving the media narrative?
No. Sorry.
Michael Tubbs is another super influential mayor in Stockton who drove a lot of the national narrative on this. It was the only feasible option during the pandemic. Silicon Valley has been talking about how they're going to steal everybody's jobs, and so we should pay people. Automation is going to drive away well-earning jobs. Did policymakers get empathetic suddenly when we weren't just talking about the global South and the global poor? We were talking, you and I, and everybody faced this a crisis, and we realized that cash really gave us the choice on how best to improve our lives. Is it just a vote winner because of politics? The answer is, or is it because evaluation? Our long history, our 165 studies were finally read, and people believed our work. The reality is that there were a lot of different drivers. A host of factors are necessary. They're all necessary. Each individual action here. Yes, the evaluation. Yes, the press. Yes, the ease of doing this. Yes, there were champions and advocates. Yes, the catalyst, right? In a lot of policy choice and decision making, the catalyst is super important. COVID pandemic was a very particular type of catalyst. All of these things need to operate in concert together, right? All necessary, but not sufficient. But I'll end with this. What if you took away evaluation? What if you had all the elements here for policy adoption and choice, but you just grayed out, you took out evaluation? How would you know that what you were ginning up all the press for, what you were deploying with ease, what you were finding advocates to champion, what you were driving in policy circles to address a particular catalyst? How would you know that this was good? How would you know that it worked? And so if you don't know it works, what's the point of having all these other elements to drive change and improvement? Right? And so while all of these things are necessary but not sufficient, I really argue here that evaluation is the cornerstone. Evaluation alone would not have gotten us there. The 165 studies have lasted for an incredible amount of time, for 20 decades. Sorry, not 20, for 2 decades. That didn't motivate policymakers. You need all of it to come together, but evaluation here is the cornerstone. So with that, that's my last slide. I'll hand it back to you, Bill.
Good. Let's open it up to comments, questions.
Firstly, thank you so much. I have a question about how people think like households receive the aid, and specifically who gets it, and if there's a differentiation between if it's most likely a man or a woman. And in that case, like, have you seen any possible differences in like whoever is the person dealing that with that money, what investments like they end up doing? So like, for example, like if they're more conservative or if they spend the money more freely, if we're intent to care about like more healthcare, like kids' educations, and then the man maybe focuses more on business, depending if it's a more like stereotypical like gendered role society, and if that impacts kind of the outcomes of your intervention.
Totally. That's a great question. Thanks for that. Let me answer first the mechanism by how the money is delivered. In the US, we allowed the beneficiary to choose how they wanted to cash out. So there was everything from direct bank deposit, checks mailed, card mailed to you for the unbanked, so that you can just receive the card and go to ATM cash out. You could also get MoneyGram for the unbanked. So basically the point here is that we released through a variety of different methods. And in places where you can give choice, give choice. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the prevailing approach to do this is via mobile money. So receiving money via text in your phone. Now your second question is a really great one. Do we choose who receives the money? And are there differences in a household, a man or woman? And are there differences in outcomes? By default, we don't differentiate. We let the household choose. In one or two of our programs, based on partner requirements, yes, we did pay, or we did preference transfers to the female head of household, or gave the female head of household like a higher amount to try and incentivize more participation, because in some countries, social protection participation falls, is incredibly unequal in the household. You get much less participation by women in the household, and so increasing transfer sizes for women is meant as a signal to drive up participation. So those are some program designs. In terms of outcomes, I think I'm not sure if this was in the Kenya paper that you read, or it was in another one. We did have expenditures fall across particular gender heteronormative lines in Kenya, with women spending more in the household, men spending more on productive assets. The global literature is actually mixed. So part of evaluations do a lot of evaluations, not just one study in one context. And when you start to look at a lot of evaluations together, these are called meta studies or systematic reviews. And so when you look at a meta study or systematic review on this particular question of do outcomes change between men and women, the result is mixed. It's not conclusive as to whether you get particularly stronger outcomes consistently that fall along gender lines.
Yeah, Richard.
So I was curious, when it comes to evaluation, how does Give directly balance measuring like the performance of their cash transfers with like the privacy of individuals in regards to how they end up spending that money that they receive?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, so there are a lot of different ways nowadays to digitally track people's expenditure. especially in economies where digital currency is a closed circuit. And by closed circuit here, I mean you receive a text with more money in your phone and you go and you pay for a banana at a store by texting somebody else that money. That is, that's the easiest way to track. There are questions there on privacy. You can always work around that by trying to get people to consent. But that's currently, we don't really operate in ecosystems outside the US that have those kinds of closed circuit approaches to actually tracking how people digitally spend their money. And so a lot of the way we do this is through both surveys and observation. And again, that's a lot. You deal with that through consent. You deal with that through visiting the household can reject, can turn you away. So you get refusals, or you can get households to say, yes, I would be happy for you to sit with me every week, every month, come up with a logbook and track our spending. So you deal with that through asking people if they want to participate.
Any questions? Hans, you kind of big a big question when you trace the significant growth in cash payments across the board. That slide was really very interesting over the last 2 years in particular. So where do you see things going in this space? What does 4 years from now look like?
That's a really great question, Bill. And that is, I think, the exciting question of the time. And it's an exciting public policy question, right? Because how do you use, if you're a cash advocate, as we are, how do you use this policy window that has opened up and ensure that there's longevity beyond the immediate crisis, right? While recognizing that, of course, crisis response will always be at levels of investment that you can't replicate in steady state. What's super interesting is, especially in the U.S., if you look at what the Biden administration has done with the child tax credit and a few other cash transfer programs, is that it's very difficult. Yes, it's done under the context of the crisis, but once these things are put in place, it's very hard to unwind. These are incredibly popular moves, right? We'll see, with the amount of polarization, whether these things get extended, but they're incredibly popular. So one question here is, look, you cannot deny the political leverage that you have if you want to strike down something like this. So that's one. We should continue to make the case, make the evidence-based case for cash around the world. It should continue to draw on the long history and the systematic reviews and meta studies, not just one-off studies, but a whole history and canon of literature. But I think that the real battle on the future of this now is going to come in financing and in budgets, right? And so financing and budgets here is really the battleground, because if you look at how a majority of governments finance their increase in social protection, it was through loans and grants, right? And that's going to catch up at some point. And so, yes, I think many countries in the world are starting to realize that yes, they can take on higher levels of debt than previously imagined. Even, you know, this is a continuous debate even among the left and the states. But what really, the real hard question is, do you allocate budgets away from other less well-proven interventions to cash, right? So loan debt spending is, you know, especially for many in the developing world, is ultimately unsustainable. How do you finance this? One of the finance this is to reallocate funding away from programs that don't quite work. That slide where I showed the effects in that particular nutrition of spending on alternative programs that don't work versus just spending on cash. That is a piece of evidence and evaluation to help make the case for this. But really, the future of financing, I think, is a real big question. And then ultimately also, I think finally the fourth point I'll make on the future of cash here is that last mile delivery in developing countries is still incredibly difficult. Identifying people who should be on social protection rosters is really, really hard. In the US, we do that based off tax returns, but there's still many, many holes. Millions of undocumented are not on those social protection rolls. Now think about a country that has no tax returns or social rosters at all. How do you identify and how do you give coverage to these populations? A lot of new technologies, a lot of the work that I've been working on, working with telecommunications companies, which have the highest digital asset penetration across a lot of these countries, that maintain databases that are much larger than your text database. Working with them to reach people in need. I think that's a huge implementation challenge that will be on the frontier of cash.
I had a question about the ethics of randomized controlled trials in real life settings. And I was wondering, how do you reconcile the duty of care with expectations for scientific validity?
That's a really great question. So here are a number of thoughts. Is cash effective? You know, a very basic randomized control trial. I do think that the canon of evidence there is clear enough such that we should just be distributing cash, especially in the developing world. More in the US, more in higher income countries, I think does need to be done. That's the first thought. You know, when the evidence is clear, and this is the same principle in healthcare as well. When the evidence becomes clear, you should just do it. Cut the trial short. Don't do the trial. Just do the program. Compares the care interventions versus cash, other forms of approaches versus cash. Those studies need to happen, right? You know, policy where their money. I think the tactical point here is that you have a limited budget. And so there are people who are going to be excluded from your program regardless. What we are saying in a lot of the trials we evaluate, we do, is to say, we are going to exclude people already because we only have $10 million for this program. Those people that are being excluded, why not have them participate, right? They're not being excluded as a function of the RCT of the trial. They're being excluded as a function of budget. It is better to have them involved in the evaluation for future expansion of the program than not measure at all. And so that's a very tactical level reasoning on each individual level project that we've taken.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
okay, you broke up a little bit there, Hans, but I think you got the message across. Yeah. Yeah, Brianna.
My question is, do you see you're directly replacing humanitarian projects or even like working with the government if you replace those programs, getting funding from them and then distributing, like kind of becoming a channel of distribution?
That's started to happen. You know, one of the we have developed systems, not just in terms of the actual distribution, but in the targeting, the identifying of people and the enrollment and the payment, the whole end-to-end chain. We have developed systems that have just scaled so rapidly that during the pandemic, governments looked at us and they themselves struggled to have that end-to-end system, and said to us, push out our funds, please. This happened in a number of different countries. So I think that started to happen. There are other countries that have tremendously powerful and strong systems that we're in admiration of. And we're like, you know, we're happy to support in whatever way we can, but you guys should run your own programs. At the end of the day, we think, look, even if we are pushing out funds on behalf of governments, governments have the mandate, right, and the domain to take care of its people. Civic sector organizations are going to supplement a lot of government-led programs, and so we're happy to have governments lead and then to fill in gaps. You know, for example, in the States, if we could find ways to pay undocumented individuals, right, that is a gap that the federal government is not covering with their cash transfer program. We'd love to be able to try and fill that.
Yeah.
Hi. So in Sri Lanka, following the 2004 tsunami, the government came under a lot of fire for only giving cash aid to their supporters. Your organization, on the other hand, seems to have a lot of follow through when it comes to what happens with the cash, who it goes to, because of your evaluative model. How do you propose that governments and other organizations in engaging with this kind of cash transfer programs kind of implement your ethos to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen?
Yeah, such a great point. I don't know about the Sri Lankan case specifically, but it is a very, very true point. I've heard this a fair amount. Look, cash is a very compelling tool, right? Imagine if in the States, everybody who's eligible for the CARES Act or the American Recovery, only Democrats got it because the Democratic president was in power, only Republicans got it when Republican president was in power, right? Like that would be horrible. Working with auditors, having external validity is just wildly important here. It's for us, yes, an ethos is important, but institutions and structures are really valuable. So sometimes the role that we play can be, when we partner with governments, can be to act as validators, right? As a party that has done a lot of cash transfers around the world, to test for systematic discrimination, whether it's by politics, whether it's by race, by gender, by any protected class. It's just having an external audit system is just really, really helpful. We too, even within our company, we have an internal audit team, of which I don't know the identities of the staff members. I only know the head of our internal audit team. And she does checks at the community level. And her team goes out to the community and goes, did Hans design a program that systematically discriminated and only enrolled his friends, right? Is he getting kickback? And so these are our internal institutions. It would be amazing, I think, for governments, for other organizations around the world to build similar institutions that execute upon the ethos.
We're at the end. Two observations. One, I can't help but think apropos of that question and the finances, how interesting it would be to go behind the scenes of Give Directly. There must be a pretty sophisticated finance and delivery system for cash that's behind the leaders like yourself. So it would be interesting to, and probably a very complex IT structure as well. Be interesting to get that window of information at some point. And finally, apropos of your point about the political will, I recall the commentary, and maybe just from the Democrats, but after the legislation was passed, and child care credits and cash started to flow, they were making the statement that they believed that 50% of poverty was eradicated almost overnight. That the potential of that may not be true, and it would come, I would imagine, from a more in-depth evaluation. But it does show a little bit of the political scene regarding that and the political will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Census Bureau report that came out in September showed that directly that the number of the percent of poor in the U.S. fell to its lowest point since they started tracking. It fell during the pandemic, as we saw enormous job losses, right? And I think Robert Reich, the former labor secretary, came out and basically said, you know, of course, this is a partisan statement as well, but it came out and said, one thing we've learned from this damn pandemic is that we can lift, government's action can lift people out of poverty, and we can afford to pay for it. So now, you know, it's not just debates on the Hill. Census Bureau actually just came out with the results of this in September.
Some evidence is actually popping up to that effect. Hans, again, thank you so much. This has always been really informative, really interesting. And I come away each year with more of a feeling that you are on the cutting edge of change. Your theory of change is beginning to work in significant ways. You know, beyond this question about humanitarian aid being reformed, you can already see that. It's just a fascinating trend. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for having me, Bill and Ellen. Take care.
Bye, Hans. Nice seeing you.